everyone and welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. For those of you who are familiar with this case, I'm going to be talking about it from a perspective of mental health and also how Gypsy might be feeling, also about the mental health and the coercion behind the case and behind the certain people within the case. So let's go ahead and get started. This is going to be a good one, so stay tuned right until the end.
And trying to remain so strong. I know it's good if I'm alone. I got it. I gotta go, run.
So as I said, I'm going to go ahead and talk about some facts from the case. I'm going to keep this brief because this is not a true crime channel. This is a mental health channel and sort of lifestyle content. So this is going to be more of a mental health video, and I'm going to be talking about some of the facts just to get everyone kind of caught up to speed. But if you would like some more information about the actual case or about any of the other bits and pieces, then please do go and check out some of the true crime channels that do go into more detail, because this case is actually very interesting. I'm also going to be talking about Munchausen syndrome, or as it is known now as factitious disorder, and what that is and how that relates to the case. I'm then going to be going on to talk about Gypsy and the negative effects that being a victim of factitious disorder from her mother might actually have on her mental health, her physical health, all those types of things. I'm going to be talking about the punishment that she got and what better alternatives I think that she could have had. I've got a lot of opinions about her punishment. And finally, I'm going to be talking about my hopes and dreams for her future. So first of all, let's get into the facts. This case took place in June 2015 in Missouri, USA. Gypsy Rose was born to Rod and Dee Dee Blanchard, but then she grew up with Dee Dee for the majority of her childhood following the breakup from her parents' relationship. Prior to living with Dee Dee on her own, Gypsy was described as a perfectly healthy, able-bodied child. Following a minor accident in which Gypsy scraped her knee, Dee Dee started to claim that Gypsy was suffering from various different ailments. These went from anything from epilepsy to muscular dystrophy to being slow for her age to even the use of a wheelchair full time. So factitious disorder, which it's now known as, used to be known as Munchausen syndrome, or Munchausen's by proxy. This condition is characterised by somebody deliberately making themselves unwell or making someone else unwell in order to either gain attention or sympathy from others around them. In this case, Claudine or Dee Dee Blanchard produced symptoms on her daughter Gypsy Rose. Some of these symptoms were as a result of the many medications that Gypsy ended up being on. Gypsy was on a feeding tube at one point. She apparently needed the use of a wheelchair, according to Dee Dee, and there was just many things that she had such a complex medical history, and all of these things were according to Dee Dee. So now moving on to prior to the crime. At the time of the crime, Gypsy was dating a man that she'd met on a Christian dating website, and this man's name was Nicholas Godejohn. Initially, Gypsy attempted to get Nicholas and her mum Dee Dee to meet and for the relationship to start budding from there. Obviously, Gypsy had known Nicholas prior to this, but she wanted them to kind of like meet more naturally, and then for the relationship to kind of be known, and for hopefully for Dee Dee to accept Gypsy and Nicholas's relationship. When this ultimately failed, the plan to kill her mother became something that she started thinking about. At the time that Gypsy and Nicholas were arrested for the murder of Dee Dee, Gypsy told officers that she was 19, but later it was found that she was 23. This goes on to support the fact that Gypsy thought she was a lot younger than what she actually was, and this was actually something that Dee Dee had lied about throughout Gypsy's life. It was discovered through talking to Rod Blanchard that when Rod had called Gypsy to wish her a happy 18th birthday, Dee Dee had not let Gypsy get on the phone before telling Rod not to tell Gypsy that she was 18 because she doesn't think that she's 18.
Called her for her 18th birthday, and Dee Dee said, "Don't tell her she's 18, you know." I'm like, "What you mean don't tell her she's 18? She knows she's 18. It's her 18th birthday." Well, she don't know she's 18. She's, you know. I thought it was weird.
And personally, I can't imagine how it must have felt to be Gypsy. You know, thinking you're 19 one minute and then suddenly being told you're 23. Like 4 years have suddenly just disappeared and vanished before your eyes. You've got to come to the terms of the fact that your mother is gone, and yes, this was something that you had planned to do, but the other option was to keep living this lie and keep living this controlled manner that she had no choice in. She had no way of having any freedom, which but then also to be told that you are 4 years older than you actually think you are. There's so many elements to this story that I personally, I don't know what I would have thought, because I would have suddenly gone, okay, so now my mother is dead, and also the fact that, you know, I'm 4 years older than I actually am. What else is there to this story? So going back to the whole Gypsy thinking she was a lot younger than what she actually was, I believe that this actually allowed Dee Dee to almost make Gypsy feel a lot more childlike and to give her that sense of innocence, and therefore it probably made it somewhat easier to control Gypsy and to make her think she was younger, so therefore she had more power or more assumed power over her daughter. She also at times would say to people, like professionals and things like that, oh, she may be 18 or she may be 19, but she has the brain capacity or the brain like functioning level of like a 6-year-old or something like that, so you need to talk to her like that. And that's when professionals would then believe everything that Dee Dee was saying, because who else are you going to believe? It's only Dee Dee or Gypsy sort of thing. When thinking about this case, and I actually came across this case quite a number of years ago, when I think it was shortly after it happened, and then everything kind of went quiet, no one was talking about it because Gypsy was incarcerated, and now that she's due to be released, everything is now coming up, and so I decided to make a video on my thoughts behind it, because it's really baffling how a mother who is supposed to care for your daughter can have this issue where all they want is the attention, and to the point where they are putting their daughter at risk or their child at risk. And for me, I'm not a mum yet, but I want to be a mum, and I could never imagine putting any child at risk, let alone my own child, because that just seems just baffling and just like, why would you do that? And then as I dove deeper into this case, I began to think about the various plans that were discussed in the trial, and the first initial plan being that Nicholas and Dee Dee would meet, and then they would go ahead and have a lovely relationship, and Dee Dee would ultimately approve. Well, we know from the case that Dee Dee didn't want Gypsy dating. Dee Dee didn't even want Gypsy to have her own independence or her own life. So to think that she could get away with just introducing this man and then suddenly this man being her boyfriend did seem a little bit unrealistic, but that just plays into the part of like what like Gypsy's mindset was like, because it's very unrealistic and irrational to think that your mum is suddenly going to go, oh yeah, by the way, you can just date now. Like, to think that your mum is suddenly just going to like turn around and be okay with it is kind of a little bit like unbelievable. So then I started to think about Gypsy's mindset a bit more, and I started to think, did Gypsy fully understand what she was getting into by having a relationship with Nicholas? Gypsy was caught out talking to people on the internet and had to have fake profiles, and you know, had to do this all behind her mum's back. So in that way, her mum would not have taught her about the things that you and I might have been taught about. So then I began to think about Gypsy and the realistic approach that her mum might have taken to her talking to someone online. If you don't want your daughter to have a life, then surely her mum would not have educated her on the dangers of online friendships or even to the point of online dating. So then I begin to think, well, if Gypsy was not knowledgeable about this, and she obviously did it for a certain reason, she obviously went on these sites to gain some sort of companionship or some sort of friendship, and I don't blame her for doing that, but she probably didn't understand the real dangers that could impose. I've met plenty of people online in the past, and I'm lucky that majority of them have turned out to be absolutely amazing people, and actually some of my best friends are people that I originally met on the internet. But I was taught about some of the online dangers through school and a little bit through my parents, but Gypsy was homeschooled, and I can't imagine her mum would have had that taught. So it just goes to show that she probably had no knowledge about the dangers of talking to people online. And then there's part of the case where Gypsy goes ahead and says that they had sex in a cinema or a theatre restroom, like a theatre bathroom. And I begin to think that she probably didn't understand the concept of unprotected sex and all of that sort of stuff, because her mum surely would not have told her about that, considering that she didn't want Gypsy dating. So I believe that Gypsy did not fully understand what she was getting into with this relationship with Nick. I don't doubt that they each had feelings for each other at the time, crime, but I also do highly doubt that Gypsy knew what this all meant, you know? Like, it just seems a bit unbelievable that she would know everything about relationships considering she hadn't been taught it and she hadn't had a life of her own. So now moving on to the crime. So the facts of the crime is that Dee Dee Blanchard, or Claudine Blanchard, was murdered in June 2015 by Nicholas Godejohn. She died as a result of being stabbed multiple times. Gypsy was the one to ask Nicholas about killing her mother, but Nicholas physically acted and physically did the crime alone.
You never told him to stab her 17 separate times, right?
No.
For this, Gypsy received 10 years in prison and was convicted of second-degree murder, which she pleaded guilty to. So Nicholas Godejohn. I do not know what to think about him. I honestly do not like him as a person at all, and just some of the behaviours that was shown in court and things like that. He obviously doesn't understand or doesn't want to take responsibility for his actions. So when it came around to the court date, he was convicted of first-degree murder, which he pleaded not guilty to. I'm sorry, but if you have admitted in interviews that you stabbed her mum...
Okay, she felt like if you killed the mom, then that's the only way she could be with you.
Yeah.
Do you know the mom's name?
I don't know her real name. All I know is that she goes by Dee Dee.
Dee Dee, okay. So, has Gypsy asked you to kill anyone else?
No.
Okay, she just wants you to kill her mom.
Yes.
Okay.
How can you plead not guilty? Like, I'm not that great with all the courts and stuff, but if you physically know in yourself and you know you've admitted to officers that you stabbed Dee Dee Blanchard...
Okay, she just wants you to kill her mom.
Yes.
Okay.
Then how can you plead not guilty? How is that even possible in your mind? How can you think that pleading not guilty is going to help your situation? Anyway, he was convicted of life in prison and he has tried to apply for parole, which has been rejected every single time that he's applied. Now I'm going to move on to the alternatives for Gypsy. I'm going to move away from Nicholas Godejohn and move straight on to Gypsy. So Gypsy was convicted of the 10 years in prison. She has served 7 years of this 10-year sentence and she's due to be released on the 28th of December 2023. And I can't be happier. When I was looking at this case, just thought that even her going to prison was unfair. Gypsy has described how that her life is better in prison than it was living under with her mother. Like, that just goes to show the amount of torture that Gypsy was subjected to.
I'm happy that it's over.
God pulled you through it.
So I simply believe that Gypsy should not have gone to prison. I think that there should have been consequences for her actions, yes, but prison was not the idea. She was a prisoner to her mother and then briefly a prisoner to Nicholas, which I'll get into why I think that in a little bit. And then she was incarcerated. So it's almost like she's never had a life to herself. And so I feel that incarcerating her for 10 years, and yes, she's only served 7, but that's then another 7 years that she's been locked up or she's been imprisoned to somebody. She's now going to be 32, or she is 32. And that means that she has never had a life up until 32, which I'm only 28. And I would find that horrible. The thought of not having a life until you're 32 is just what most people could never imagine. So the reason that I believe that she was a prisoner to her mother is the same as most people would say, is because she was not allowed a life. She was not allowed to make decisions for herself. She was not allowed to attend medical appointments on her own. She was forced to do things that she didn't want to do, and even down to the fact that she used a wheelchair, but towards the end of the time with her mother and before her mother was murdered, she began to realise that she could actually walk, and she began to see through some of the lies that her mum was telling her. And she said in an interview somewhere, and I'll see if I can find it and put it in, that she didn't believe she was as healthy as what she was until she was incarcerated. So Gypsy also suffered physically at the hands of her mother, and I think this is something that's not really talked about. So not only was she a prisoner mentally to her mother, she also suffered at the hands of her mother abusively. She was chained to her bed for a period of about 2 weeks, I think it was said in the case, where she was only let go of her bed to go to the toilet, and apart from that she had to be chained to her bed for the consecutive 2 weeks. And I think this was following an incident that Dee Dee didn't agree with, whether it was meeting up with somebody or whether it was running away, I think it might have been. She then chained her to the bed as part of this punishment.
She'd hit me with a coat hanger, or her palm, and I'd have to take so many slaps for depending on how severe it was that I did.
Which goes beyond factitious disorder. Like, factitious disorder as a thing, or Munchausen's by proxy as a thing, is the lies. The abuse usually isn't part of it. It can be, obviously, because in this case it is, but it usually isn't part of it. Munchausen's by proxy is making the symptoms on somebody else. It doesn't excuse the abuse. And this is kind of why I think that, as another YouTuber that I've been watching about this case says, Gypsy would have died or Dee Dee would have died. Dee Dee would have killed Gypsy by the amount of medication she was giving her and would have potentially accidentally overdosed her. Or, as the case actually played out, Dee Dee was murdered.
I was on a bunch of medications, and I know that's no excuse, but on Xanax, I felt like I had no emotion, and I wasn't thinking right.
Secondly, I believe that she was briefly a prisoner to Nicholas Godejohn, and the reason I believe that is because, and I'll insert the clip from the trial, but some of the text messages that were shown between Gypsy and Nicholas were just downright controlling.
And those texts pretty much led right up to him being at the door, correct?
Yes, sir.
And before he got to your house, he wanted to make sure that you were wearing something that he approved of. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
And I believe that her getting arrested and her getting incarcerated probably was for the best, because she almost was going from one manipulative, controlling situation with her mother to another. Like, some of the bits, and I'll show you the actual clip, but the bit that really resonated with me is that Gypsy says, "I've got £5,000, and Nicholas, or $5,000 I think it is, because obviously it's in America, and Nicholas goes, "Don't you mean our 5,000? And that just sent chills through my spine. But anyway, I'm going to insert the clip.
And then when it came to the money, you can see here in this conversation on May 30th that you text him that with the $5,000 I have, we will be set. And he says, you know, good idea, correct?
Yes, sir.
And at that time, you thought $5,000 would last you guys a long time, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And you say that it's $5,000 you have, and he actually responds there on the left, "Dear, I know, but you mean our 5,000. You see that?
Yes, sir.
So when Nicholas was arrested, he actually lied about every single thing that had happened in the lead up and in the relationship, and or even to the murder. He lied about it. This is when police used a tactic that basically was playing with the feelings of the murderer, and basically turned around and said, "Gypsy's told us everything, and you don't want to get Gypsy in trouble, do you?" And there's actually an interview where I'll put some of it in, but it was to the point where they had to use this tactic in order to get him to change his story and to tell them the truth.
And that is just, you're going to have to be honest with me. Because if you love her, if you love Gypsy, then you're not going to let Gypsy get in trouble without you being there to help her, okay?
I understand.
And so what you need to know is that Gypsy told us everything.
Okay.
We didn't talk to Gypsy all this time and not get everything.
Okay.
That's what we do. And the truth is not what you've told me.
How much have I told you to believe is the truth?
As I said previously in the video, I don't doubt that they had feelings for each other, but the relationship was definitely built on toxic ground. Nicholas was, or just seemed, very controlling, and Gypsy was very naive to the situation. You know, she hadn't been taught about the dangers of online dating, or even just the dangers of the world in general. And she also had just been naive and had fallen victim to her mother, so she hadn't known any better. Like, everyone around Dee Dee, like every single person, even Rod, thought that Gypsy was unwell. And so when Gypsy walks into the trial, like when she actually walks in, everyone is shocked that she can walk. And everyone is shocked as to how healthy she is. Because as far as they're concerned, Dee Dee was telling them that Gypsy was pretty much terminally ill. She had cancer, she had sleep apnea, she had epilepsy, she had muscle dystrophy, she was not able to walk. Yet suddenly this perfectly healthy woman is walking in to the courtroom. And it just shows the power of factitious disorder and how lies can become someone's reality. So the alternative that I believe that Gypsy should have faced is, I believe that Gypsy should have faced a intensive and extensive therapy, which would have been inpatient because you've got to understand that she is convicted of second-degree murder. And I believe that this would have helped her to understand the world, how it works, but also to ultimately understand what had happened in her relationship with her mum and how to avoid that in the future. I believe that this would have provided her with a lot more tools to help help her following her release. Whereas I know in most prisons, I don't know about the US because I'm from the UK, but a lot of prisons don't have facilities set up to help people who have been a victim of trauma. And I believe that going to a therapy where it's inpatient, like this is mandated therapy she has to do, doing that would have been a lot more helpful to Gypsy as a person. She still would have not been free, she still wouldn't have been able to live a life, and she still would have received some sort of, in a way, punishment, but this would have been helpful punishment. Even if it's to the point where she goes to therapy first and then gets incarcerated or then gets sent to a halfway house or something like that. Like in the UK we have this thing where like if you are seen as like, you know, you need to be back at a certain time, you can be electronic tagged around your ankle, and that is like something that they can do in England. I'm not too sure about the US, but even if it was something to do with that, like something similar to that, but being incarcerated has taught her some things. Like she actually physically put on weight. Most people go to prison and they lose weight because of the poor diet and things like that. Gypsy gained weight, which just shows how much of a control her mother had and how much neglect she was suffering at the hands of her mother. So before I continue with this video, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. I really enjoy making these sorts of videos. These videos are my passion. I absolutely love talking about the mental health side of things, and usually I talk about things like abandonment or like boundaries or things that can help you to set things in your own life. But I just felt that this was important, and as you will know in a minute, I'm going to talk about the mental health side of things in this case. So let's go ahead and get straight on into that. So with the mental health side of things, I can't believe how Gypsy must be feeling right now. I can imagine that she's feeling a certain level of anxiety in terms of, you know, anxiety for the future and anxiety for being released, because she's never had freedom. And sometimes when people have too much freedom, or in their terms too much freedom, it can come and it can be a case of that they almost don't know what to do with the freedom. And I can imagine she's fairly anxious about that. I can also imagine that she's probably very anxious about living with other people again. I did read that she actually got married to somebody like through the prison system, and I'm not sure if he actually was incarcerated or whether it was through a pen pal system or something like that, but she got married to a man, I think it was like a little while ago now.
The 30-year-old tied the knot with Ryan Scott Anderson in Missouri on June 27th amid the 10-year prison sentence she's currently serving. Little is known about Gypsy's new husband, but according to their marriage license, we know Ryan hails from Louisiana. But Ryan wasn't Gypsy's first serious romance in prison. She was previously engaged to a man named Ken in 2019. They met through the prison's pen pal program, but the two called it off that same year.
And as far as I'm aware, she's going to be released and she's going to go home to family. And I believe her family are actually excited to have her back, which, to be fair, if I was part of her family, I would be too. She has suffered so much. I would want to give her the world. That's kind of where my thing would be if I was somebody who was looking forward to Gypsy coming home. I would be like, you have suffered so much. What do you want? I want to give you the world. I want to give you everything and more that you could want. I want to teach you the world. I want to help you. And that's kind of where I hope she, and what I hope she's given when she gets released. So I can imagine that Gypsy probably is also worried about trusting others. I have suffered at the hands of an abuser. I mean, not to the extent that Gypsy has, and I'll leave my story time up on the card above somewhere, but my trauma has left me with the point of I still struggle to trust others, and I still struggle with living with other people and things like that. So I can only imagine how Gypsy might be feeling. We also need to imagine that Gypsy might even be feeling anxious about living a normal life. And as silly as it might seem to everyone like me and you who have lived a normal life for your whole of your life, you've got to imagine that Gypsy has probably never gone to a grocery store on her own and had free will and choice over what she is going to be eating. She's probably never cooked unless they taught her that in prison, which some prisons do in the UK and some don't, so I don't know about the US system. But she probably has never cooked a meal for herself. So learning to cook might also be another hurdle she needs to get over. Socialising and also learning to trust other people that she, you know, are actually wanting good for her, especially with the publicity of this case. Like, you can imagine that some people are going to want to be friends with her for the wrong reasons. And I think she's probably also going to be quite anxious about that. But I'm going to leave this video on a positive note, and I'm going to leave about my hopes. So I hope that Gypsy does get released on December 28th, 2023. And I hope that that she gets released to her loving family, which from my understanding are very excited to welcome her back into the world and welcome her back into their loving home. I hope that she has shown as much compassion and care, and she's shown the maximum amount of this, because she should have had that since day one. And I hope that she has shown that compassion that she truly deserves. I also hope that the man that she married, I'm not sure of his name, so I'm not going to divulge that, but there is a really cute photo somewhere on the internet of her, like, you know, I think it's on her wedding day, or like, you know, with her man, and I hope that he is able to show her the true compassion and love that she deserves. I also hope that if this relationship is positive for her, I hope it lasts, and I hope that she has a long, happy marriage with this man. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. What do you think about the punishment that Gypsy received? And what do you think about the fact that she's going to be released at the end of December 2023? If you like this video, then please don't forget to give it a huge thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment about your feelings towards this case. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you in my next one. Bye.
Just like you're young again, no, don't you cry. Just get back up again.